Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, giving you yet another edition of starter builds for a new league, and in this time around it is the Synthesis League. We get these roughly every 3 months, and for the most part starter builds are pretty static, so they don't change too much, and you can look back at plenty of previous starter build videos and pick builds from those. And in particular, I will mention that the very last one I did, the Betrayal Starter League video, still has 3 builds that I could strongly recommend that you do this time around as well, and it will get you started quite nicely. Friendly reminder that starter builds are specifically made to just get a decent start into the game, not necessarily beat the entire game and face roll it. It is just there to get you through the game, through maps, somewhat into the end game, and potentially with enough investment it can actually get you to the end game, but it won't necessarily be the most overpowered builds. And as well as that, they will oftentimes have some of the new skills so that you can test out the new stuff that's in there, but those ones of course are somewhat provisional, as we don't quite know if they're going to be that good or that amazing. I also do recommend checking out other streamers and YouTubers, as they will have plenty of different suggestions, and then you can pick your own build based off of that, or just steal some ideas and get your own character made too. So as I did mention really quickly, the previous video for the starter builds for the Betrayal League, a few of them are still very viable and I can easily recommend them, and that would be Scion Ice Spear Totems. You can do that as a Hierophant though as well quite successfully. Just keep in mind a Snake Pit Ring is probably going to be the best option, but Ice Spear Totems was a very good character to start with, I think, as well as Arc Totems. I think that's still going to be great too. Cold Scourge Arrow Deadeye is another one that, if you're looking for a ranged character, hasn't really changed and can very much still be a very successful starter for a ranged side of things, though it is a little on the tougher end to start out a ranged character as a starter build. It is definitely one of the friendlier ones to do if you're going to do a ranged one. And then of course Chieftain Consecrated Path. There are plenty of melee builds out there that are still okay and do get started pretty comfortably, and Consecrated Path, whether a Chieftain, a Duelist of any of those really ascendancies, a Berserker, all sorts of stuff, Consecrated Path is still a pretty solid starter too. But I will get started with the first starter build, and it is pretty much the only melee edition for this list, and maybe even attack-based edition, and that is the boys, Double Strike Gladiator. Double Strike is a build I have played several times in the past, and it is one of the best melee skills to scale off of early game and natural progression without really needing much gear, because it is similar to the way that spells scale. As you gain levels with the gem, you will gain damage, and that is the largest source of your damage towards the build. That's how spells work, and Double Strike is the exact same, because as you level it up, you do get flat physical damage to your weapons, and then that means that you don't have to really have super good gear or super good weapons. And this time around, it is the Gladiator version that I played in the Betrayal League, which I can strongly recommend checking out the guide videos for if you want to actually really learn the ins and outs of the way Double Strike works. But it's probably going to be one of the smoothest melee starters you can possibly have, because it scales very well off of little gear. It has some pretty satisfying clear, and it doesn't have the greatest clear speed in the world, but it is very respectable and extremely satisfying with the Gladiator bleed explosions. However, it does have some of the best single target sort of capabilities in the game, thanks to Vile Double Strike, which is a skill that is built into your natural Double Strike. Pressing the Vile button then unleashes up to 4 clones of yourself, and that's why the build is often dubbed the boys. And it really just means that you can sit back, relax, and let the entire build do the work for you. So as I did mention, I do have a couple of videos throughout the Betrayal League about this build specifically, and it is going to be the exact version that I played in that Betrayal League. It is a Gladiator, and I will go over real quick what kind of passives you're looking for and some of the strongest sort of setups you're going to be using for leveling up. As I said, it's a Gladiator, and the large reason to do Gladiator is because of the attacks have chance to bleeding, and then of course gratuitous violence, which causes an explosion when enemies that are bleeding die with bleed on them. They cause an explosion. It's very satisfying, and it helps your clear speed quite a lot. You then also get a bunch of extra damage throughout the tree, throughout the little ascendancies here, auto generation for your frenzy and endurance charges, and a little bit of block. It is important to have some bleed chance throughout your double strike builds so that the added physical damage from the gem actually gets applied quite often, because as you can see here, it does say adds a lot of physical damage against bleeding enemies. Now that 120 to 180 is pretty significant in these types of builds, because as you can see, the weapon I was using doesn't have much more physical damage than that, and it scales roughly the same in that manner. The build's weapons that I was using earlier on in the last league was Bloodseeker Claws, and the significance there was that they have instant leech, so they could top you up from roughly 1 life all the way up to 4 in pretty much 1 hit. That's no longer the case thanks to the leech changes, and you can't leech more than 10% per hit, but I think Bloodseeker can still be a very viable option there. You may just not have the same level of face tank that we had before, but besides that, you can easily use plenty of other claws or even swords and spec into the sword side of things and still have lots of good success there too. Wasp Nest Claws are a good start as well. Scavers certainly aren't too bad on the sword side of things, but overall your weapons shouldn't have to be that good for double strike to succeed at a pretty high level all the way through to endgame. The rest of the gear is pretty damn flexible. You can run a Belly of the Beast as your chest to start with, and you're looking for a bit of flat physical on your gear, maybe some accuracy, plenty of life, and plenty of resist, and a Lion's Roar goes a long way to upping your damage, as it's essentially pretty close to a 7th link in this sort of build. Your main 4 links that you're really trying to get when you start leveling double strike is Vile Double Strike. You then really want Chance to Bleed as soon as you can, as well as Ancestral Call and Melee Splash. You get Ancestral Call at level 4, Melee Splash at level 8, Chance to Bleed at, I think, level 1. So as soon as you can combine all of those into a 4 link is when your double strike starts actually clearing and doing a lot of work for you. Up until that point, if you're missing any of those, it does kind of feel a bit bad, and you are better off leveling with a different skill, like a Molten Strike or a Sunder or something else, because without Ancestral Call or Melee Splash, your clear isn't very good, and without Chance to Bleed, you're not reliably bleeding enemies too often, at least in the early game. So bear in mind that when you're doing double strike, it might feel a little bad early on unless you have all the links. But once you get the links set up and you grab a Vile Double Strike, it does start to shred all by itself all the way through up into maps. And as far as the passive tree is concerned, it basically builds itself. You can't really go wrong. Pick up life nodes as you feel like you need to, but yeah, you're just going through the general passive tree here, grabbing life. Probably avoid too many crit nodes until you are actually starting to become pretty heavily invested in crit. So just go for some general physical nodes, and then eventually you'll get to the claw wheel. And once you're at that point, that's probably once you start investing in some crit everywhere else. It can, of course, be done in plenty of other ways, and swords is another really good option. It's a lot less bloated on the tree that way, because swords only have a few really good nodes, but you don't get the built-in leech, and some of the cooler claws out there, like Bloodseekers and Wasp Nest, are really good staple weapons early on. Now the next build I would love to recommend, and I do encourage that you check out plenty of other people's builds in this sort of category as well, and that is Essence Drain, Soul Rest, Bane, and Blight. I personally have not played Essence Drain in a bit over a year, but I have played about 4 or 5 of them in the past. I just have not been on top of Essence Drain for quite a while, because not too much there has changed. At this stage, it did get a slight buff, and you do have a couple of new skills in Bane and Soul Rend, which are going to be kind of similar in playstyle to what Contagion and Essence Drain currently is. In my opinion, it looks like you're still going to be putting Essence Drain just about every single one of your Chaos builds. You might potentially be clearing with Bane and Soul Rend, but then also using Essence Drain as single target, while potentially also using Soul Rend spam, maybe some Wither spam, maybe some Blight spam, and overall they do have a pretty large amount of synergy together. I am aware that currently Essence Drain is a pretty good way of starting a league out and leveling a fresh character, and with the current or recent buffs to Essence Drain, it should only get better, especially with the ones to Occultist and Trickster. I do have a life-based and a CI-based Trickster and then Occultist for you guys to pick from, and I do personally think that a Trickster life-based with Mind Over Matter as the defense should be a slightly smoother start to the league, because you don't have to worry about getting any energy shield gear, and then ultimately just the life and mana regen you get from Trickster is pretty damn insane. If you're unaware how the skills work, for the most part, Essence Drain is just a big, powerful single target dot you throw out onto an enemy. If it dies with Contagion on there as well, which is another skill you cast, that big circle there, then your Essence Drain, the powerful damage over time, will be spread to lots of other enemies, and it does create a very powerful and satisfying chaining mechanic. Now, as I mentioned, a couple of these are pretty new and not something we can entirely rely on, but you can fit them into the Essence Drain Contagion playstyle and build, and try them out and see exactly how they work. And that is Bane and Soulrend, and hopefully, I think they both do interact rather well in this setup, and I think Soulrend in particular should just be a nice, powerful additional single target to the current Essence Drain and Blight lifestyle. So the actual build itself that I've got mocked up here is a Trickster, and it is life-based, and it is also using Mind over Matter. So in the end, you are running a fairly sizable amount of life and mana, and you should result in something like 5,000 to 6,000 life, while still maintaining about 2,000 to 2,500 mana. So the way Mind over Matter works, if you are unaware, is that every time you get hit, some of that damage is going to transfer to mana. So you want to maintain a relatively decent mana pool and mana regen, and the Trickster has plenty of tools at its disposal to help you do that. Most notably, Weave the Arcane restores a bunch of mana just about every time you're using something, as well as granting a lot to begin with. And then also Patient Reaper, which is an extremely powerful clear speed sort of upkeep in your arsenal, where just about every time you're killing something and or a large pack, you're going to top straight back up to full life, mana, and energy shield, and it's a very insane passive indeed. You then also have Swift Killer, which gives you a lot of extra clear speed in the form of frenzy charges, and a bunch of extra damage in the form of power charges, and of course Prolonged Pain, which does help out your Essence Drain damage, your Soulrend damage, and of course Soulrend does look like it's going to need some duration, so if you're messing around with Soulrend, you probably want something like this for duration, as well as speccing personally into some duration, but I've left that out since it is just purely a Essence Drain template. As well as that, if you're going to go for Bane, the entire curse modifier thing, you may want to spec into some heavier curse stuff like Skittering Runes, or up here in the form of Hexmaster. But other than that, it's a pretty standard passive tree. You get as much of the chaos stuff as you can on the tree, and then just some life and mana throughout the rest of the tree. It is a very strong start early on because you get so many strong chaos damage over time nodes right from the get-go. All of these here, and then you go down here and get all of these, and you go through here and get that, and that's like 200% damage just right off the bat, and then you get plenty of that up there. You can go straight for that and weave in life and mana as you see fit and as you need it. You'll have Contagion early on, Blight early on, and then pick up Essence Drain at level 12, and that's when the build really starts to take off, and that's when it should start to feel pretty smooth. Feel free to spec into some area as well if you think you need it for both Essence Drain, Contagion, and Soulrend, and Bane. Shit, they all use area. So, yep, jump into that if you think you need it. But this is the template, and I think it should be a very smooth start and get you probably all the way through the game if you scale it appropriately. I do, however, also have a CI Occultist tree I can drop on you guys if you want to play that instead. This is once again provisional. I haven't played this exact tree, but I don't see too many other different ways of building this type of build, and Occultist probably will lend itself to be a bit stronger for Bane scaling if you want, because you can go through the Malediction nodes, but I think just Void Beacon, Withering Presence, and then all of the strong ES is still going to be just as good. The only difference is it's going to take a bit more work, I think, to get your energy shield up, because it's very gear dependent, and early on it's a bit harder to craft energy shield gear, especially when it's going to be rather flavor of the month, and dense fossils will probably be rather expensive. But that's the passive tree, and I would certainly give you guys that as well. But I think just from my own personal experience playing the game, the Trickster and life-based should be a smoother leveling experience all the way through. The next build I want to highlight for you guys is the Ice Nova Occultist. Now, this was, as I mentioned in my last video, Probably my favorite build of the entire Betrayal League, and it's just because there was so much shattering, so much interaction with the skill, and it's so extremely satisfying to get rewarded for your gameplay in the self-cast manner. There will probably be a few tools in this new patch that aid in increasing this damage output, but otherwise you did see that Ice Nova got a slight nerf in damage. However, it did gain a slight boost in cast speed, so overall the build shouldn't really experience any positives or negatives, just probably a slightly faster playstyle, but you're going to hit slightly less hard. Now this can be done as almost anything. You can do an Elementalist, an Inquisitor, a Trickster, an Assassin, an Occultist, let's see, an Ascendant. You can do just about any Ascendancy for this in the caster-based realm, and all of those will work rather nicely, and CI does seem to be a pretty strong option at the moment as well. So I'm going to give you a CI Occultist for this build, and the previous one I did was life and mind over matter mana based, and it can certainly still be played that way, but I think this will be one that I give you guys as an actual proper CI build. It will be kind of tough to level into, because as I just mentioned, it is kind of tough to level CI characters, because around level 50 or 60 is when you should be swapping into a lot of energy shield gear, but it might be hard to still get some until much later on, like level 70 or 80. And just a quick info about how the Ice Nova Frostbolt interaction works here. When you shoot out Frostbolts, they don't do too much damage, but they do some damage, and the point of them is though that you can then cast an Ice Nova on top of those Frostbolts, and every single cast will cast onto 2 Frostbolts. However, if you're running Spell Echo with your Ice Nova, and you should be in this build, then every single cast will shoot out 4 Ice Novas onto 4 of your Frostbolts, and it becomes a very powerful interaction that ultimately really feels like it's rewarding you for the gameplay that you are doing. Now, if you do happen to choose a Ice Nova starter, I would recommend that you reference my previous Ice Nova character in Betrayal, something like halfway through Betrayal, maybe a month ago in the YouTube. I have made a couple of videos of an extensive guide on Ice Nova, as well as the path of building using what type of gear you're looking for, what type of stats you're scaling, what type of passives. But I do have an actual new tree for you guys to look into, and that is Ice Nova CI Occultist. Like I said, it's going to be probably a bit tough to level as pure CI, so you may want to take some of these life nodes early on and level more as a life-based character, transitioning into CI a little bit later, maybe around level 50, 60, even 70, and overall it I think should be an increase in defense to your character, and thus increasing your playstyle in that sense. But this is the current passive tree, and it is just a bunch of energy shield nodes spread throughout. There are a lot of new nodes out there that for the most part give you just a bit of energy shield leech as well as some area, so this build will have even more area than it had before, and as you can see through those clips, you had some pretty insane area. So the area nodes there and the area nodes there give quite a lot of a boost. You get some energy shield leech nodes, as well as Ghost Reaver that then lets you multiply your leech, and you can grab more leech through nodes like this. If you really want to spec into even more, you can grab the nodes down there, but this is the current provisional tree that I'm going to hand out to you guys, and like I said, it's going to be pretty tough to level as CI, but you can go as life-based, and you can go as just about any of these ascendancies. I do think Inquisitor could be very strong. I do think Elementalist can be very strong, and currently Trickster is probably going to be quite meaty for this type of build as well. So I'll leave that up to you guys, but the templates are there and you can easily follow them. The things to remember though, Frostbolt is probably what you're going to be leveling with. You can then get Ice Nova pretty early on, I think level 12, that then gets cast onto those Frostbolts, and that's where the interaction starts playing against each other. However, you don't actually get this jewel from a quest reward until Act 5, which helps with your clear speed quite a lot for Frostbolt. Up until then, you just attach a lesser multiple projectiles, maybe even a volley, and Ice Nova itself doesn't actually start to feel really good until you get Spell Echo, and that is at level 38 in Act 4, so give it a chance up until level 38, because at 38, that's when things really start to take off, because with the Spell Echo interaction, you get 4 Ice Novas per cast, and it starts to feel pretty crazy. You can level with plenty of other skills up until then. If you want to stick to pure cold, you can go Freezing Pulse, Frostbolt, or Glacial Cascade, but plenty of other spells will level just fine up until you get the build up and running. Now the next two I give you are going to be revolved around the new or reworked skills, so bear in mind they are kind of provisional, but they do look strong enough to work and function, and I'm probably going to give into Divine Ire myself, but I'll start out with Flame Totem. Now Flame Totem has been around for a very long time, but it was reworked pretty vastly in the way it deals damage and some of the effects it does, as well as how it looks. I think currently it should be a pretty strong totem build, and you can't really go wrong with most totem builds. So Totem's Arc, Totem, Ice Spear, I still strongly recommend if you want to get into those, but this one is going to revolve around the reworked Flame Totem and the Chieftain Ascendancy. I think it should be a pretty strong, though not the fastest starter. Overall, I think it should be rather cheap and hopefully effective right through to the end game. So the reworked Flame Totem gem looks something like that. It's now Holy Flame Totem. It's got a bunch of new stuff, but primarily it is now a physical damage attack that has 50% of its physical converted to fire. You then try and focus on converting the other 50% to fire if you're scaling strictly around fire, and we are in the Chieftain setup. It looks like it doesn't really gain too much as it levels, so it should be pretty strong right from the get-go, and then it also has a new thing in the form of Consecrated Ground that will also grant immunity to you and allies. So the kind of build that I've mocked up here is a Chieftain Flame Totem. There's quite a lot of good synergy here for that sort of build. You get a lot of penetration here, the full conversion. You then get a good amount of additional fire every now and again. You get this over here, which gives you covering enemies in ash for 10 seconds. That's quite a large boost to damage. Some sustain for yourself because you get a lot of leech from the totems, and then as well as that, some sustain for themselves. And you also get this big node here that gives enemies taking a lot of extra fire damage and some good sustain for your totems down here, but you could also maybe spec into this if you'd rather that for the slightly better damage and regen for yourself as well as endurance charges, but you'd probably want to get as few endurance charges to make use of that one. So it's a pretty basic tree. It is non-crit, so it should scale rather nicely all the way through the game, and you start out as a Marauder, picking up the totem nodes pretty early on. Now if you really feel like you need totem placement speed, you go for these pretty much as soon as you can, but most likely you are going to try and make your way through the Templar tree so that you can get straight into Ancestral Bond and start summoning 2 totems, and then eventually you get multiple totem support, and that means that you can start summoning 4 totems. For every placement you are putting down 2, and ultimately that should make a much smoother playstyle. A lot of the totem nodes though, like these and these do have a bit of placement speed, and that does go a long way to helping enjoy the totem playstyle. Other than that, you are getting plenty of life through the tree, getting plenty of mana as well, since we do want to rock Mind over Matter in this build, and a bit of mana and mana regen. And Elemental Overload is very important for your damage scaling, as you will be proccing that through either Stormbrand or Orb of Storms quite reliably, and that's a large amount of elemental damage to your build. I did include a second curse, so I think you should probably be running Flammability and Elemental Weakness in this build, and currently I've proposed you do that through a Stormbrand curse on hit, or an Orb of Storms curse on hit attached to Arcane Surge and Ellie Weakness, and then most likely a Flammability Blasphemy, as well as that reserving your mana with a Herald of Ash, maybe also a Clarity. The links are something you're going to have to figure out as you go, but they should be pretty obvious as you start going, and then the node over here is pretty strong just to give you a bit of extra fire damage from your physical as extra fire. The conversion shouldn't really be necessary, as you will already have full conversion through Namahu Flames Advance. I think it should be rather strong overall, not the biggest mind blow of a build ever, but I think there should be enough damage to clear things in the end, and the totem playstyle is one that very much caters towards being able to survive endgame and also play it rather smoothly. The last build I want to show you guys is, as I have stated, largely provisional, not quite sure how it's going to work out or if it's worth building around, but it is around the holy skills and they do look really cool, so I'd have to give you some sort of template that you can get in and mess around with if you want to jump straight into them like I do. I most likely want to play Divine Ire, which is the third one showcased. It looks kind of like a laser beam, but the build that you play with built around any of these skills should basically work to use all of them as a little bit of a test and see which one you like most, and then tailor a few passives and item choices to suit the needs of the skill you pick. I think they should be pretty strong in plenty of ascendancies, but this time around I think I'm going to go an Inquisitor, maybe a Trickster, and I do have a Inquisitor tree to show you guys and then go with, and they should be strong with Inquisitors because it lets you ignore all of the resists of the enemy, and then you can build around a bunch of life and mana through mind over matter as well. This is the skill I most likely want to use. Don't really know how well it's going to function, but it looks like it's going to be very strong on single target, and then as well as that you can chuck in some burn proliferation. If you want to build around an Elementalist or a Trickster and the Stormfire Ring, it looks like it's going to be pretty nutty for some burn damage as well. So the 3 new skill gems are as follows: Purifying Flame, Wave of Conviction, and then Divine Ire. They are all physical bases to start with, that then get converted to a bunch of elemental, and it's up to you to convert the rest if you need to, or if you see fit to do so. It's worth it as an Inquisitor because you do want pure elemental so that you're then scaling the elemental and then penetrating or ignoring enemy resists. And as well as that, you can also chuck in some Stormburst action throughout this build to try that out, because it's also been vastly reworked, and Stormburst is now also physical, converted to lightning, and then it should have a fairly nice channel and area playstyle. Has potential to be very strong on single target too, through that last line of its text. So I do recommend, if you're going to try this type of build out, like most likely I am, that you try all these skills out and see which ones feel best to you and what's going to work best in various situations, as well as various cast while channeling plus other spells too. So this is the current passive tree I've proposed. It does have a little bit of area. It's got a fair few power charges, but it's fairly condensed to the left hand side of the tree. I haven't really decided to move over to the shadow side because there's so much stuff you want over here that I just couldn't justify making the extra bit of travel, but we'll see how we go. Like I said, I will most likely be playing this and hopefully updating it over the coming days as I'm playing it. But yep, plenty of life, or decent amount of life. I think you personally need about 130% if you're going a mind over matter build like I am here, and then a decent amount of mana and mind over matter. One of the things I haven't highlighted in these builds is that you can spec purely mind over matter with Eldritch Battery, and what that does is that your energy shield then replaces your mana as the defensive barrier for taking extra damage, as well as what you cast your spells off of, and it is an option a lot of people are going to be utilizing, but I haven't included it in any of these starters. So besides that, it's pretty smooth to level. You're just picking up all of this early on. That is a lot of damage early on. And then you get all of these for more damage. You can start picking up some channeled stuff, some good power charges, some good life. We do take both of these nodes. This one has some conversion to lightning. This one is just pure damage because it does read fire spells, have 15% physical damage converted to fire damage. So if you're running Divine Ire or Stormburst, you won't get this conversion, but it is still a very good node for damage, as you can see through the list of the other modifiers. So it is still worth picking, but bear in mind, many skills won't get this additional conversion for both skills, only one of those conversions. I am hoping this is going to be a staff-based character using our traditional Eclipse staffs with a power charge on crit gem socketed in there as a free 7th link. That is a lot of crit, and it does enable quite a few nice passives like these and these. And besides that, it's a pretty normal tree, I think, and should get you going throughout just about any of these skills. And our jewels currently should be filling out some of our crit multi, so you're looking for crit multi in most of those jewel sockets, as we will be a bit low without jewel socket help for the crit multi. I'd say this is going to be kind of provisional, not sure how well this will work out as an Inquisitor or as a starter in general, but I think the skills look very much fun enough that you have to try them at least pretty early on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that most likely. As I mentioned, should be able to do that as well as a Trickster, Assassin, Elementalist, maybe even Occultist, and possibly plenty of other things. Not sure if there's too much Totem synergy with these, but I'm damn sure people are going to try and make it work. So that's it for the starter builds and the video for this league. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope it was a little bit informative. Don't blame me if the builds suck. I am very much mortal and can make mistakes in picking some of these builds. Just look at Lancing Steel last league. So hope you guys enjoyed it, hope it helps you out, and I hope you have the best possible start picking a fun build and one that takes you wherever you need to go throughout the new Synthesis League. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the morning in the new league, and see you next time. See you tomorrow. Soon.